Well, I hope you didn't forget where we've been. We are immersed in our study of the book of Exodus in a series we call The Biblical Moses That Hollywood Forgot. And last week, what we discussed in Exodus previously, the biblical Moses that Hollywood forgot, we saw Moses, of course, leading the exodus of the children of Israel across the Red Sea, which was parted at the power of the Lord. By the power of the Lord, they marched across the Red Sea, got to the other side. Why did the Jews cross the Red Sea? And the answer should be apparent. To get to the other side. This is not a hard equation to answer, but I like this one because it moves. I want to remind you that we studied last time the praise and celebration of Moses and his sister Miriam as they celebrated the successful crossing on dry ground through the Red Sea and the destruction, of course, of the Egyptian threat. We now pick up the narrative in Exodus 15. Now, as we think about the text that we're going to look at today, it's an important text, and just as the praise of Moses and Miriam landed beautifully on Thanksgiving weekend, which is what that was all about, this particular passage has to do with not the holiday of Hanukkah, but the concept of Hanukkah, which you remember is a Hebrew word that means what? Dedication, right? And so we're going to look now that the Jewish people, the Israelites, the Hebrews, are truly free. They are free without threat of being dragged back or punished by the Egyptians. They are completely free of the Egyptian threat. They are now moving forward, following God and Moses. Let's see how dedicated they are to the Lord. How committed are they? And as we study this passage, it speaks through the generations and millennia and asks us the question, how dedicated are we? Are we, am I, are you any more dedicated to the Lord than, and his leadership, than these Exodus Hebrews were 3,500 years ago? Well, I am excited. Let's delve into the text. We're going to see two episodes that will test the dedication of these individuals. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. They marched forward, and raised their hands because they were in Shur. It's good to be insured, right? And they were truly with the good hand. They were the good hands people. They were in the hands of the Lord. And they went 3 days into the wilderness. And here's the problem. They found no water. There's not an indication of travel time, 3 days. It's a matter of distance, right? So perhaps let's just say 30 or 35 miles into the wilderness, 3 days journey, and they have a problem because there is no water. And when they came to a place called Marah, verse 23, they could not drink the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore it was named Marah. Marah is Hebrew for bitter. You know, when we eat the bitter herbs at Passover, it's called moror. It's from the term Marah. So Marah means bitter. You remember when the story of Ruth, when Naomi says to Ruth, don't call me Naomi anymore, call me Marah. I'm bitter. I'm a bitter person. And so the waters of Marah are bitter. They are unpotable. They are undrinkable. The water supply is not viable. So the people grumbled at Moses because they've gone now some time without drinking water, without any drinkable water sources. So the people grumbled at Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Now, if we look at this verse, we see a few things. What are they doing? What's the verb? Grumble. And it's a very interesting thing. Some passages, some translations translate grumble as murmur. Murmur, 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 right? Some say grumble. Some I would perhaps translate it as whined. This is an interesting term because it's only used, you would think that the term grumble is going to be throughout the Hebrew Bible. We'll see plenty of examples of it. No, we only find it on the lips of the wilderness generation, right? We see it used over and over again by the Exodus generation, and I think one time in Joshua by the children. You learn from your parents, right? And you pick up their habits. But this is something that is specifically limited to this particular generation. And it is particularly telling because it is this particular generation that has seen the greatest miracles of the Lord that any generation of Jewish people had ever seen to that point. And nonetheless, they are the ones who have the specific word that Moses uses all the time, that is to grumble, to murmur, to complain, to whine. And so that's the verb. What is the object of the verb? Where are they? Who are they doing it to? Whom are they doing it? It is to Moses. They are grumbling at Moses, their leader, and saying to him, "What shall we drink?" They are whining, they are complaining, they are talking poorly about. This is the same leader who, after 10 plagues, led them out of Egypt. A spectacular scene. This is the same leader who, with a raising of his staff at the command of God, the Red Sea parted. And the question is always going to be, what have you done for me lately? What shall we drink? Red Sea had a lot of water, none of it drinkable. And now here we are, we've praised, and praise it's thirsty work. We danced, we praised, we marched. What are we going to drink? The previously expressed trust. And remember, the Bible does say that the people believed in God and in Moses, his servant. That was very clear. But their previously expressed trust in their leader was unfortunately extremely shallow. Their confidence in Moses poised to evaporate at the first sign of trouble, of challenge, of difficulty. And during the wilderness wanderings, we're going to see this term over and over again, specifically in the narrative portions of Exodus and in Numbers. The Israelites are going to grumble against Moses, and then when Moses is not enough, then also Aaron, whenever they face a crisis. This is the first reaction that the Exodus generation has to crisis, and that is to grumble. Not to pray, not to seek the Lord, not to ask of the Lord, what now? But literally to murmur, to grumble, to complain to Moses. Okay, big shot, what have you done for us lately? I'm a little thirsty. Speaking of which, so am I. Well, let's see the reaction of the leaders. See what happens. Then Moses, previous reference, cried out to the Lord. So Moses' response was to ask the Lord. Right? Ask the Lord. Seek the Lord, which is what the people should have already known to do. And the thing is, surely they did know to do that. They did know that the proper procedure when facing difficulty is to cast your burdens before the Lord. Because up to that point, I think it's not arguable that the Lord has an extraordinary, exemplary, unprecedented track record in meeting the needs of the Hebrews and demonstrating his power. What's a little bit of water? But they grumbled to Moses, not to Moses, at Moses. And prepositions are important too, right? Grumbling at Moses. So Moses, however, cried out to, prepositions, to the Lord. Prayed, in other words. And the Lord, again, that's the covenant name of God. That's Jehovah. That's Adonai Hashem. Right? Covenant name of God. The God who is not going to abandon his people and leave them to die of thirst in the desert after expending all the energy he did. He's not going to let them die of thirst. Right? The Lord shows Moses a tree. Piece of wood. And Moses threw it into the waters, and the waters became sweet. Not like soda, right, but potable, right, drinkable, right? There he made for that, because there were no dentists yet in the wilderness, so it couldn't be sweet like sugar, but it was drinkable. There he made for them a statute and a regulation, and there he tested them. So, the purpose of this crisis is to test the people. To test what about the people? To test their dedication to him. Right? And he's saying, therefore, that if one follows the commandments and statutes, that's the way to go. If you'll give earnest heed, pay very close attention, in other words. Give a passionate attention to the voice of the Lord your God. And do what is right in his sight. And give ear to his commandments. And keep all his statutes. They don't have a lot of statutes yet. The law hasn't been given from Sinai. Moses is preparing them. The Lord is preparing them. He says, I will put none of the diseases on you, which I have put on the Egyptians. In other words, obedience to the Lord's commandments, to his statutes, will immunize the Hebrews, not from disease, but from the sort of judgments and plagues that he had recently unleashed upon the Egyptians. Unstated in this passage, but implied nonetheless, is the converse. That on the one hand, obedience will immunize you from my judgments. On the other hand, disobedience will result in severe judgment. Do not think that because you're Jewish, because you're Hebrews, because you're Israelites, that you are exempt from my judgment. You of all people are subject to both my blessing and judgment. You're first in line. So while I test you, don't test me. Don't test me. And the passage here, this verse closes with this famous statement that is used, well, all the time by various denominations and believers, out of context. For I, the Lord, again, covenant name. I, the Lord, am your healer. I am Jehovah, in this instance, Ropha is the name. I am Ropha. I am the healer, your healer. The covenant God, and this is the covenant God of the Abrahamic covenant, because the Mosaic covenant has not yet come, not yet been given. I am your Ropha. I am your healer. But he didn't heal anybody there, and nobody's sick there. The spiritual lesson, obviously, to be learned from this verse and this passage is that although the Lord healed, if you will, the water, that's what he did, he repaired, restored the water, it was Israel's faith that was in need of healing. This is a passage that has to do with blessings and judgments. Obedience will result in blessing. Disobedience absolutely will result, ipso facto, is going to result in judgment. And I can heal the waters, but it is your faith. It is your attitude toward me that is most in need of healing. Make sense? It's important to look at that particular verse in context. Not just grab it because it happens to mention that God is a healer. Verse 27. Lesson learned, lesson dispensed. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 date palms. And they camped there beside the waters. It's very obvious that Marah is an object lesson, right? Moses, it's almost a throwaway. It's a very casual notation. By the way, if we kept marching, just another day down the road, right, was the oasis of Elim, right? Elim means large trees. And you have 70 palm trees in this area. Lots of water. It's an oasis. So it would have been, in other words, it would have been very easy for when the people realize, okay, Marah is undrinkable, and they start to grumble at Moses, what shall we drink? Moses could have easily said, well, the Lord is going to lead us another day's journey, or another short journey ahead is a big fat oasis, all the water we can stand. Well, everything we need, our needs will be met, but God desired to test them. It was a test at Marah. And the Jewish people fail that test. How dedicated were they? As long as things are going well, as long as they have water to drink, food on the table, clothes, provisions, as long as their needs are met, they are perfectly fine. You know, if you think about in life, what category of person is it out there who, when they have food, when they have warmth, when their needs are met, they're happy and contented and so angelic in disposition? And the moment that they experience a felt need, they start screaming out. What category is that? Well, that's babies. Those of us who have had babies, we understand that everything can be so blissful until the child all of a sudden realizes, oh, my diaper's full, or I'm hungry again, or I miss my mommy, or whatever. And you get that very annoying, well, that was my son. I don't know what your children sounded like. Are you, in your relationship with God, are you more like an adult, a mature adult, or are you more like a baby? How are you doing on life's tests that are being thrown your way on a regular basis. Well, let's move on to the next test. Let's see what happens. In the wilderness of Zin, which actually sounds, ooga booga. This sounds like it's going to be a scary place like Mordor or something. No, it has nothing to do with sin, wrongdoing, missing the mark. It's a location, okay, scene. Wilderness of Sin. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation and the sons of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after departure from the land of Israel. So, they are exactly 1 month since the Hebrews departed Egypt. So a month in, here we go again. The whole congregation, kaladat, the whole congregation, not just a few, not just some, not just the majority, this is the whole congregation of the sons of Israel. Here's this word again. Grumbled, Moses, murmured, complained, whined, grumbled. And this time not at, the word now is against. It's intensifying. And now not just Moses, but also Aaron. Against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. The whole congregation. So let me be very clear. These are not describing the shenanigans of a few troublemakers, but a wholesale rebellion is brewing. A month, 1 month later, after the Exodus, 1 month later, even the casual reader of Exodus is occasionally, I know I am, flummoxed by the level of intensity to which the whining of the Hebrews attains. Experts at whining. They moan. What do they moan? The sons of Israel said to them, Moses and Aaron. Just imagine hearing this. You're Moses, you're Aaron. Done what you've done. Seen what the Lord has done. You're going to hear this now. Would that we have died by the Lord's hand in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. They would have been better off, in other words, if the Lord had mercifully wiped out the nation while they were still in Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt, and if they were wiped out, they would have been dead slaves, but at least their bellies would have been full. It's not rational. This is not the behavior of rational people. I understand, like, sometimes when you get hungry, right? Sometimes your mood, your blood sugar drops. I get that, right? You know, your blood sugar drops and you become... There is a series of commercials not long ago, and I can't remember, I think it's a Snickers bar, right? And the person turns into a wild animal or a very vicious Viking or whatever, a barbarian, and then somebody quickly feeds them a Snicker, and it's a little secretary, you know, in a dress, because her blood sugar was disturbed because she hadn't eaten. This is the realm of the ridiculous. I read this, and it truly strains credibility. But then I remember my people, and I remember the disposition of my people. These people, the Hebrews, they have the gall to accuse Aaron and Moses of having brought them into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly. We got your game. The jig is up, Moses and Aaron. You actually did everything you did. Those 10 plagues, the death of the firstborn of Egypt, the Red Sea crossing was all part of a nefarious plan for us to die out in the desert. You stinkers. Now here's the thing. Kill this whole assembly with hunger. Do you remember what the passage says when they describe the Hebrews leaving? The Hebrews departed Egypt along with an abundance of livestock in their possession. with flocks and herds. So the concern cannot really be a perceived shortage of food. The problem seems to be the Hebrews did not yet wish to be utilizing their abundant food supply. They were expecting mommy, or in this case, daddy, to provide for them, even though right in front of them was a food supply they could have taken advantage of. And we think about the Hebrew, the Israelites. Whenever you see those great Exodus scenes in the films, they're always herding animals, and they were in C.B. DeMille's. Right? There's ducks and there's geese and there's donkeys and, well, you wouldn't eat the duck, but there's cattle and there's all kinds of animals, goats and sheep, all kinds of animals. But the Hebrews didn't want to eat the supply they had with them. But then the Lord said to Moses, and the Lord's not ruffled by this. The Lord is cool. Behold, in other words, heads up, I will rain bread from heaven for you. And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may, here's this term again, that I may test them, whether or not they will walk in my instruction. So, are they only with me in the good times, or will they actually follow through with obedience? Will they walk in my instruction? These are logical preparatory tests to deliver to the Hebrews before you're going to drag them to Sinai and give them the 613 positive and negative commandments that make up the Mosaic covenant, the Sinai law. So, if it is flesh, if it is bread the people desire, the Lord will make it very clear that he's going to oblige them. He's going to provide by raining down bread after a fashion from heaven. And the purpose, again, is that I might test them, that I might prove them. Another divine object lesson for the Hebrews' benefit. And dare I say, for the reader's benefit, 3,500 years later. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. This is also going to prepare them for a new revolutionary concept they had not previously been exposed to, and that is Shabbat, the Sabbath. They are to gather twice as much on the sixth day to prepare for Sabbath, twice as much as they normally gather. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, at evening, you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now they knew intellectually. When Moses says you will know, it's an experiential know. You will know once again the latest in a long line of experiential confirmations that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, for he hears your grumblings against the Lord, against Jehovah, against Adonai, and against Hashem. In other words, God understands that when they grumble against or at Moses, and against or at Aaron, they're actually not really grumbling against Moses and Aaron. The ultimate object of their grumbling, of their murmuring, of their complaining, and of their whining is the Lord himself, their covenant God. So that's why God, he says, God hears, the Lord hears your grumblings against the Lord. And by the way, what are we that you grumble against us? Who do you think you... And look at what he says. He doesn't actually use the phrase, who. Who is what you would... Who are we is how you would normally use... This is proper English, proper Hebrew, proper grammar. Who are we? But Moses, frankly, at this point, he doesn't feel like a who anymore. He feels like a what. What are we that you grumble against us? This is the origin of the phrase, what am I? Chopped liver? This is, and the like comes from Exodus. And we're just following in the example of Moses, right? So, nation, you need an attitude adjustment, a dire need of improvement in your attitude. The disrespect you direct toward us, Moses and Aaron, your leaders, it's really just disrespect to God, right? We are the appointed, designated leaders, appointed by God. You need an attitude adjustment. Moses said, this will happen when the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and bread to the full in the morning. For the Lord hears your grumblings, which you grumble against him. And what are we? Again, your grumblings not against us, but against the Lord. So many times, grumbling. Moses, writing the passage, wants you to get the point. What's the attitude of the people? One of grumbling, one of murmuring, one of speaking against the Lord and his leadership. And Moses said to Aaron, say to all the congregation, same phrase that was grumbling, right? The whole congregation. Say to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, come near before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And here's a dramatic punctuation of God's concern for his people, to make it very clear. It came about as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the sons of Israel, that they looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord. It's the first time we see this phrase. The glory of Jehovah, the glory of Adonai, that word, glory of the Lord, appeared in the cloud. It's not the last time we're going to see this phrase, glory of the Lord, but this is the Shekinah glory. Appears visibly in the cloud. See, the covenant-making, promise-keeping God, when they were slaves, he heard their wretched cries, and he has not, since that point, gone deaf or hard of hearing. He heard their wretched cries under the oppression of Pharaoh and Egypt. Those same divine ears now hear their pathetic murmuring, grumbling against him. Well, let's see what happens. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, I have heard the grumblings. At twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. You will know, experientially again, that I am the Lord your God. So it came about an evening that quails, not Dan quail, birds, little chickadee things, bird things, right? Quails came up and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew around the camp. Numbers tells more about the quail and about the meat. This is focused on the manna. There's a layer of dew around the camp. And the layer of dew evaporated. Behold, on the surface of the wilderness, there was a fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. And the Hebrews are going to discover a new and creative provision of the Lord that would satisfy their need for bread, which they will call manna. Now, I still remember the first time that I was exposed to the concept of manna, to the story of manna, what this stuff, this fine flake-like thing, fine as the frost on the ground. I was in second grade. I was 7 years old. My mother was my Sunday school teacher, and she was teaching the kids the story here about Moses and about provision of God of the manna. And as a 7-year-old, I had a very hard time trying to imagine what this stuff was like, because although later on it tells us that they preserved a jar of manna in the Ark of the Covenant, I've never seen that preserved jar, right? So I have no idea what this actually, we have no picture. You can Google it, you can search all you want, Wikipedia, you won't find a picture of manna. And so as a child, I read this description. It's a flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. I put the flake and the frost together, And I began to think, okay, I got a picture here. Now, when the sons of Israel saw it, they said to one another, what is it? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, it is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. And so I imagined as a 7-year-old Frosted Flakes. Now, I got to tell you right now, as you read the description, it's not Frosted Flakes, okay? But first impressions are lasting ones. And so still to this day, when I picture the Israelites gathering stuff, 2 quarts of whatever manna was, I just see, all the Frosted Flakes out there. It's fine, it's it's a flake-like substance. There it is, Frosted Flakes. All you need is Tony the Tiger, and you got it. But this is what the Lord has commanded. Gather it of it every man as he should. I don't know what you think of manna, but it's stuck from 7 years on up to now. I'm not going to change. Gather of it every man as much as he should eat. You shall take an omer, 2 quarts, a piece according to the number of persons each of you has in your tent. So whatever it was, sufficient quantities are daily generated for 40 years. And they're able to eat, approximately 2 quarts worth. Each household was required to meet the needs of their own family. And in this fashion, nobody went hungry. And every day's nutritional need was met. The sons of Israel did so. Some gathered much, some gathered little. When they measured it with an omer, he who had gathered much had no excess. He who had gathered little had no lack. Every man gathered as much as he should eat. It's an extraordinary thing. There was always enough. It reminds me of what Jesus says. Yeshua taught his disciples to pray. And in that prayer, that model prayer, is a prayer for the Lord to provide their daily bread. An example, historical example, that is absolutely etched into the minds of every Jewish child when they hear this story. From childhood onward, the idea of God providing manna in the wilderness every day for 40 days, that God would meet just enough for the day. Not too little, not too much, just the daily bread. And that is included, of course, in our model prayer that Jesus has given to us. Yeshua taught us, give us this day our daily bread. God will provide. Right? Moses said to them, let no man leave of it until the morning. But they did, surprise, they did not listen to Moses. And some left, my people, and some left part of it until morning, right? And it bred worms and became foul. And Moses was angry with them. Yeah. Leftover manna, no longer fit for consumption. Give us this day our daily bread. You got to search for it. You got to gather it every day. God will provide. He won't let you down. But you've got to go and get. You can't leave it out. Don't gather twice as much, except for the Sabbath, because it's going to rot. And it's going to breed worms. And it's going to stink. And so, understandably, the fragrant violation of the Lord's command caused Moses to lose his temper. Once again, the text gives us just a very fleeting glimpse into Moses' humanity. It reminds us that Moses, even though he was a great man of God, he's not an automaton. Right? He's not a Disney Hall of Presidents leader. Right? Wind him up, plug him in, and he goes. No, he's a real man who really followed the Lord. Well, they gathered it morning by morning, every man as what he should eat. When the sun grew hot, it would melt. Frosted Flakes, by the way, only melts with milk, not by the sun. So it can't be Frosted Flakes. But nonetheless, I threw that in, no extra charge. Now on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for each one. When all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, then he said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow is a Sabbath observance. Again, new idea, new concept. A holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you will bake, boil what you would boil, and all that's left over put aside to be kept until morning. So apparently this is stuff that you can bake, you can boil it, you can make it into bread, you put it in a pan, you can do a lot of things with it, but it's not as versatile as shrimp was in Forrest Gump. But nonetheless, you can use it, but you have to keep that second day for Shabbat, you have to keep it to the next day. So they put it aside until morning as Moses had ordered. And it did not become foul, nor was there any worm in it. So you can't think of it as a natural phenomenon. This is not a natural phenomenon that on these days it's going to rot on the second day, but golly, on Sabbath it retains its integrity, right? It doesn't rot on Sabbath. This is supernatural stuff. The provision of the Lord. Eat it today, for today is a Sabbath to the Lord. Today you will not find it in the field. Remember, Pharaoh had not been a big believer in granting his workforce a day off from their labors. So Sabbath is a new concept for the Jewish people, introduced in chapter 16 for the first time. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, the Sabbath, there will be none. It came about on the seventh day. Here we go. There's always some. I'm not looking at any of you in specific, okay? But there's always some. You give them directions, but still, came about on the seventh day. Some of the people went out to gather. But they found out, yeah, I know the leader said it was going to be like this, but I didn't necessarily believe, right? You have to go see for yourself. Well, they go up and see it for themselves. They go out together. They found no manna. The Lord said to Moses, now we see the Lord losing his cool. Okay, the Lord exercised, again, the personality we saw the personality of Moses, now we see the personality of the Lord. How long do you refuse to keep my commandments and my instructions? I like the King James better. How long refuse ye? More powerful, I think. The Hebrews, the Israelites, my people, could try even the Lord's inexhaustible supply of patience. If anybody could do it, the Jewish people could. Right? Now, the fact that desecration of Sabbath did not result in capital consequence for the violators is another indication that it is a previously unknown concept. Later on, you're not going to see that kind of leniency exhibited because it's a well-known law. This is not a well-known law. It's an introduced law, and it's going to be slightly different in how it's taken out. Well, finally, the sea is Lord has given you a Sabbath, therefore he gives you bread for 2 days on the sixth day. Get it? Day of rest. Don't go out. You have enough on the sixth day for the sixth and the seventh. Remain every man in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. That's the initial idea of Sabbath. That's why I can tell you that the way people observe Sabbath today with going out to worship is not the way it was given in Moses or by Moses. And Moses' day, stay in your place. Don't even go out to gather. So the people rested. It's a day of rest, not a day of get the kids up, get them fed, get them dressed. We got to go to church, right? Or we got to run around. Got to run around on the Sabbath day. According to the Bible, it's a day of rest. The house of Israel named it, not the day of rest, but the frosted flakes, manna. Because manhu, what is it? Okay, or who is it? Manhu. And it was like coriander seed, white, and its taste was like wafers with honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let an omer full of it be kept throughout your generations, that they, preserved in other words, that they may see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out of the land of Egypt. Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put it in an omer full of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout your generations, and put it in the Ark of the Covenant. As the Lord commanded Moses, so Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. The sons of Israel ate the manna 40 years until they came to an inhabited land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. Now an omer is a tenth of an ephah. Okay, so through your generations, they eat this manna for 40 years. And God's provision of manna ceased at the time the Israelites celebrated their first Passover in the Promised Land. Look at Joshua 5. The sons of Israel camped at Gilgal. They crossed the Jordan. They observed the Passover on the evening. It's the first time they observed the Passover. On the 14th day of the month of the desert plains of Jericho. On the day after Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened cakes, and parched grain, because you didn't want to have manna matzah. Okay, it didn't work. The manna ceased on that day. After they had eaten some of the produce of the land, so the sons of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate some of the yield of the land of Canaan during that year. Things changed once they were in the land. Now, let's close this out. How are we going to close this out? By seeing how Jesus himself uses this object lesson. Jesus refers to, again, the well-known, the widely known, everybody knows the story of manna. Everybody knows in Israel knows the story. It's ABCs. It's basic. Children, toddlers know the story. Right? Truly I say to you, Yeshua said to them, it's not Moses who has given you the bread out of heaven. Well, yeah, it was, but I'm going to use that and hyperbolically speak because something so much more important than manna, which is bread from heaven, according to Moses, is the bread from heaven. Jesus said, yeah, you thought that was bread from heaven? You ain't seen nothing yet. Right? It's not Moses who's giving you bread out of heaven. It's my Father who gives you the true bread out of heaven. For the bread of God is that which comes down out of heaven and gives life to the world. What or whom do you think Yeshua was referring? Right? To himself. Right. And they said to him, Lord, always give us this bread. Sounds like a great deal. Right? Sign us up. And Yeshua said to them, you want the bread from heaven? Let me tell you something. I am the bread of life. And he who comes to me will not hunger. He who believes in me will never thirst. I am the bread of life. Your fathers ate manna in the wilderness. Object lesson, right? This is what Yeshua does a lot. It's what he does at Passover. It's what he does here in this passage in John. He uses an Old Testament, a Hebrew Bible, something in the Jewish people's history, well-known, provision of God, and he says, that was a type that points to me. Prophetic type pointing to me. I'm the bread of life. Your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. There's a problem with the manna in the wilderness. It fed them, but it didn't give them eternal life. They died. And it was well known that all but two of the original Exodus generation dies in the wilderness. Only Caleb and Joshua cross over. Right? They ate the manna. It didn't preserve them. They died. But this is the bread which comes out of heaven, so that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread that comes down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he will live forever. And the bread also, which I will give for the life of the world, is my flesh. So my question to you this morning, have you partaken of that bread of life? Right? We're not talking cannibalism. We're in the realm of metaphor. Right? We're in the realm of picture. And Yeshua pictures himself, presents himself as bread from heaven, that if you partake of it, if you believe, if you follow him, if you give yourself to him, that you will not only be filled and satisfied, but you will never die. You will eternally be in the presence of God. From the moment that you say yes to him, you have an unprecedented relationship with the Lord that none of the Hebrews in the desert could have even dreamed of, because the Messiah had not yet come. But the Messiah has come. So I'm going to ask you today, on this, the center of the week of Hanukkah, dedication. Have you dedicated yourself to the Lord? And if so, have you done it in the way that the Lord tells you to do so? Disobedience will result in judgment. We saw in the text. Obedience, and the greatest thing that you can obey, is the commandment to, this is my son, my beloved son. Hear him, obey him, follow him, give your life for him as he has given his life for you. And if you do that, you have a relationship with God that will never end. Right? That decision becomes the beginning of eternal life for you. So where are you on these tests? How are you doing on these tests of life and faith that come our way? Are you receiving like what George W. Bush called regarding his college years, his university years? I received a gentleman's C average, gentleman's C. You have a gentleman's C or gentlewoman's, gentlelady's C? You get a B? You get an A? D minus? And if you're failing, right? This is the time to step up as individuals, as families, and as congregation. As the year ends and a new one dawns, let's step forward and eat and partake of the bread of life with a great fervor, zeal, and dedication.